let me start by saying this, man, okay? How proud I am of you guys, man, for how you've worked for the last 2 months, okay? It's been a long time since we won, okay? But no one stopped working, man, right? No one stopped believing. That's you guys, right? That's the locker room. That's you coaches, man, okay? Now, we got 2 game balls, guys. We got 2 game balls. One goes to DT, okay? He is second. Second in Broncos history, guys, okay, with yards and touchdowns. Okay? The second game ball, guys, goes to the defense, man, okay? All you guys, man. It's the first shutout in 12 years. Okay? 12-year shutout. Defense, 12 years. Together on 3. 1, 2, 3. Together.
Welcome to the Huddle Up Podcast, your go-to show for all things Broncos.
Welcome in, everybody, to the Huddle Up Podcast presented by Mile High Huddle. It is time to drop some knowledge. We have a win to celebrate today, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Chad Jensen, Scout Media, CBS Sports Digital. With me, as always, Will Keys, editor and writer at Mile High Huddle. Will, the Broncos did it. They finally got that monkey off their back. They broke the streak.
Honestly, it feels like forever ago and a day since they actually won a game. And I was kind of thinking to myself when it was getting pretty apparent that the Broncos were actually going to hold on to it and win for the first time since early October that, you know, maybe the last 9 weeks of our lives have just been a dream and we're all just waking up right now at the same time.
Well, they were such a different – we're going to talk more about this, but the complexion and the tonality of them as a team was so utterly different on Sunday against the Jets that it does feel like we've been in some kind of weird alternate football universe.
It absolutely does, yeah. It's not what you expect being a Broncos fan. And I think a lot of people have had to come to terms this season with the fact that even with a franchise as excellent as the Broncos have been, especially if you want to use the metrics that they always bring out since Pat Bowlen bought the team in 1984, a season where you're 4-9 through 13 games is just not common. But at the same time, it's going to happen every few years. And fortunately for us, it happens a lot less often than it does to a lot of other teams. So things could be a lot worse. Here's to a rebound from that 8-game losing streak.
There you go. Now, we don't have a lot of time today. Have some things going on tonight. It is my birthday, so I'm a little bit short on time. And I'm inching ever so much closer to that dreaded 40, the 40-year-old. What do they call that now? I guess that's technically you're creeping up on middle age when you get to 40, I guess. But that's the reality I'm staring down right now. So a little bit short on time, but we're here to give you a deep dive on your favorite team, the Denver Broncos. We need your help. Make sure, if you haven't done it, go to iTunes, go to Stitcher, whatever service that you're listening, whatever app that you listen to this show, and leave a creative review. Rate the show. Big deal for us. Also, follow us on Twitter at HuddleUpPod and at Mile High Huddle. And we do have some really good stuff to get to today. But first, we want to say thank you to our sponsor, Rep the Squad. This is one of the coolest services for a Broncos fan out there. Rep the Squad is a jersey subscription club that lets you rep every jersey you want. Hundreds of different jerseys. Rep the Squad lets you switch between your favorite stars and styles whenever you like. So maybe next week or this week, it's Von Miller with a road jersey, and the next week it's, another road game, I guess, so Emmanuel Sanders or an alternate, whatever you want to do. Adult memberships are $19.95 per month. Youth are $16.95 per month. The way it works, you get new jerseys arriving each week, fresh and clean, within 2 to 3 days from the time that you order. It's kind of like Netflix for jerseys. Rep the Squad allows you to rep your team, to rep the Orange Crush all season long, no matter if it's home, away, or an alternate. It's free shipping both ways. You get to cancel whenever you want. But here's the key. Use promotion code HUDDLE, that's HUDDLE, to get 50% off your first month at repthesquad.com. That's promo code HUDDLE at repthesquad.com. All right, so these last 2 months of Broncos football have been absolutely brutal. But I guess if the Broncos are going to snap their losing streak, they might as well do it in historic fashion, and that's what they did, shutting out the Jets 23-0. It was actually Denver's 18th all-time shutout and their first in 12 seasons since 2005. And in limiting the Jets to 100 total yards, they had 59 rushing yards, 41 passing yards. The Broncos became just the 5th team in the last 17 years to shut out an opponent while also allowing 100 or fewer yards. So that's an interesting side note. Also, the Broncos posted 2 takeaways, an interception, and a fumble recovery to finish +2 in the turnover margin. It's again, here we are living in it's opposite day, opposite week. The game marked Denver's 32nd consecutive victory when winning the turnover battle. So they extended the streak, which dates back to 2012, and it's currently the longest in the NFL and the longest overall since Green Bay did it for 34 games from 2009 to 2013. Now, the biggest trope I've heard from Broncos country, besides the fans being disappointed that the Broncos didn't embrace the tank for draft position and play to lose, is the one that somehow this win takes the onus off of Vance Joseph, that a single solitary victory in a desert of losses somehow absolves Joseph of his historic losing streak and perhaps even saves his job. Let's talk about that first. I made a video after the game basically posing the question, was this win enough to save Joseph? And the comments on milehighhuddle.com and social media were very dismissive of that notion. But I would kind of disagree. I'm not going to go so far as to say that Joseph saved his job absolutely in one fell swoop. But I do think the nature of the win was enough to earn him quite a bit more rope or more benefit of the doubt. Ian Rappaport, for example, reported before the game that Elway is really hoping this works out with Vance Joseph. And I believe him. My insight is that Elway and team president Joe Ellis, they're looking for reasons to avoid having to fire Joseph. They don't want to have to hire their 4th head coach in the last 7 years. So, while I won't go so far as to say that Denver's Week 14 win saved Joseph's job, I will say it helped buy him a little bit more time, so to speak. Earned him a little bit more rope to prove himself. If the Broncos win one of their final 2 road games, it might be enough to save Joseph, even if that's all they do. Is they win one more and it's on the road. Because the Broncos haven't won on the road yet this year. And then the next 2 games are at Indianapolis and then at Washington before finally closing at home versus the Kansas City Chiefs. But what say you, Will? How did Week 14, in your mind, affect Joseph's standing with the Broncos?
Right. So I can see how people would come to that conclusion after yesterday, because I think the nature of losing streaks, and especially one that lasts for 8 whole weeks, is that when you actually break that streak one way or another, and it doesn't matter if you do it on a last-second field goal or if you do it in really dominating fashion like the Broncos did yesterday, there's going to be a really cathartic reaction, and it's just going to be an emotional win no matter what. And I think if this game had taken place in Week 4, when the Broncos were 2-1, and this had pushed them to 3-1, it would have just been another win, kind of another notch on the wall. Just to say, all right, well, we took care of a team that we should have beat at home in the fashion that we should have. Right. And they didn't really play on offense spectacular football necessarily, other than that they didn't turn the ball over, which in the context of the 2017 Broncos really is spectacular. They played up, I think, to their potential on defense. And more than anything, they proved that when all things are clicking, they're a much better team than the Jets. And I think when all things are clicking and all things are going well, and the ceiling of this team is actually an above-average team, and they just haven't shown that since October for one reason or another, and that's a whole nother story. But I don't know if it really saves Vance Joseph's job at this point. I think he'd make a much better case for himself if he went out 4-0 in the last quarter of the season, because I don't know. I don't really have any metrics to back this up, and this is probably just a gut feeling, but tell me what you think. And I think that the last quarter of the regular season for a team that has kind of already been eliminated from the playoffs, is kind of a predictor for how they're going to do next season.
Yeah.
Like the Broncos really stumbled at the end of last season, save for the season finale against Oakland. And I guess to some extent it served as a predictor for 2017. But,
yeah,
remember teams like the Detroit Lions in 2010 go 4-0 to finish off the season, and then they finally make the playoffs after a long drought. So, I don't know if it's something that the numbers would necessarily back up, but I think there's something to be said for finishing strong. And, I hope it does save Vance Joseph his job, because he seems like a good guy and he seems like a good leader, and the team definitely seems to like him, because, at this point, if they didn't like him, we'd know it by now, because winning cures all and losing ruins all, like we like to say. So
yeah,
that's kind of where we're at with Vance Joseph right now.
I don't have the numbers either, but Vance Joseph brought that up too after the game. He basically said that, we want to finish strong, we want to win out, because the historical precedent is teams who do typically win their final 4 games, even if they're not making the playoffs, that tends to carry over into the ensuing season. So the Broncos have to be hoping for that right now. And, it's not unrealistic to think that they can do it. I mean, they're going on the road to face a team who on paper is inferior, granted on the road, which they haven't been able to win a road game yet this year. But on paper, this is a game the Broncos should win, even at 4-9. The next week they go on the road, they face Washington, they face Kirk Cousins, a guy who many Broncos fans are pining for and hoping that John Elway can, lube another blockbuster deal to bring Kirk Cousins this time to the Mile High City. So it'll be interesting to see how the Broncos perform in that environment with the Redskins. And then finally they close it out at home with a Kansas City Chiefs team whom we've learned a lot more about since the last time these two teams met. This Chiefs team, obviously, I mean, they finally got a win, but I mean, they've been on an enormous slide. And I mean, I haven't taken a look actually at the AFC West. I know they're still in it, obviously, with the Chargers being the team that has the most momentum. But I mean, that game could be very important for the Chiefs to end the season. So it'll be interesting to see if the Broncos can put some kind of an exclamation point on this season and finish out strong and take down a divisional foe. Now, another bright spot, I should say, that was historic in Denver's win was Demaryius Thomas, who led all players on the day with 8 receptions for 93 yards and a touchdown reception, 20-yarder. He now has 8,475 career receiving yards, 56 receiving touchdowns, and of course he leapfrogged Hall of Fame tight end Shannon Sharp to take second place all-time for the franchise in both categories. Only Rod Smith is ranked higher than DT in those two different categories, and it was nice to see him, ball out like he did. He played very well, but at the same time he had that one maddening drop. He giveth will, and DT taketh away.
Yeah, it's kind of been the story for Demaryius Thomas his whole career. It's almost like, I don't know, this has kind of been the case for a while, and maybe I'm biased just from like seeing plays like that Kansas City game in 2012 where he just went up over the top and caught that ball in the back of the end zone with one hand, which is still like one of the most impressive catches, like one of the most physically dominating plays that I've seen in a long time. But it's like he has a knack for coming down with contested balls, and it's like when the ball's right there and it's about to hit him in the chest, it's like it's too easy, or he's bored, or he needs some degree of difficulty to reel it in. But I don't know. That's kind of been his, I guess his football profile for a while is he's just an insane playmaker, but he just has lapses of concentration. And what's this, year 8 for DT now?
2010, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Yeah, year 8 because Von Miller's in his 7th. So.
Yeah, so I don't see that changing for him, but I think at this point you'll take what you can get from Demaryius Thomas. So I think the important thing that the Broncos learned yesterday is you really have to get DT involved early and often, and you see what happens when he does, because they're targeting him really early. And even on that first drive that ended up in a field goal, Trevor Siemian threw the ball in the end zone to Demaryius Thomas, ended up being a little bit high, and then Jamal Adams came through and actually kind of hit him in the stomach, which I thought was a late hit and kind of unnecessary. Well, the ball wasn't really catchable.
That's the thing too, is that Trevor. What's another thing that's been so frustrating? We're going to talk about this a little bit later, but we might as well talk about it now. is that Trevor Siemian just has not been good at feeding his playmakers this year. I mean, and that even dates back to last year in that, I mean, how long was the streak? I think it almost went a full season that Demaryius Thomas did not catch a touchdown pass, and Trevor Siemian was the steward of that fiasco for most of those games except for one. No, yeah, except for one, if I recall correctly, that Jacksonville game last year on the road. And that's been another thing about Siemian that's been frustrating, is just one of many things, is that he doesn't. It's some of those simple things like feeding your playmakers, especially your receivers, early. Like DT, I agree with you. He's a guy that needs to get the ball early to get into a groove, to get his confidence up, to get his dander up. And it's just like watching the game on Sunday. As soon as that first drive, I mean, I had a feeling right there. I think I tweeted something to the effect that he's going to have a big day. If you get him involved early, Demaryius Thomas is going to produce. But Trevor Siemian had himself a solid day. It wasn't spectacular. He went 19 of 31, completed 61% of his passes, a couple hundred yards, and a touchdown, 90.8 quarterback rating, and most importantly, no turnovers. He's now 9-3 all-time as a starter at home, 4-1 at home this year. And I'll give him this. Siemian, you know what? He was efficient. He executed well, Will, on third down, at least early in the game before the Broncos went into ultra-conservative mode. He protected the football. That's the model, at least with this team. If you can protect the football, play smart, distribute the ball to your playmakers, and execute on third down, you're going to win some games with this team. And if he could do that every week, the Broncos would. They would win. They wouldn't have lost 8 games in a row. But for whatever reason, and that's just the player he is, it's his ceiling, he couldn't get that done. And I don't say this to get in any kind of Siemian debate. I just feel like Trevor Siemian, we've seen that ceiling, and I think I'm not in the camp that the Broncos need to just get rid of everybody in the quarterback room next year. I think if there's one player that the Broncos should look at keeping around, it would be Trevor Siemian as a backup. But just make sure that quarterback that is ahead of him on the depth chart, that there are no ifs, ands, or buts about it. He's the starter, Simeon's the backup, because that's the one argument, Will, I've heard from people this year is that, you need to get rid of Siemian too. Well, why? He's got one more year on his contract, and he's their most experienced quarterback. Well, right. Because if you keep him around, all these guys are big Siemian guys in the locker room, and it's going to cause more of a back and forth and a battle and a power struggle and all that. I don't believe that. I really don't. I think that's a very small thing. Now, going up against Paxton Lynch, maybe there's some salt to that. But after a season like this, the Broncos go into 2018, Will, they're going to find a way to make a splash with a new quarterback, whether it's free agency or the draft, and that message is going to come on from high, whether it's Vance Joseph as the head coach or somebody else, that this is our quarterback, Trevor. You're the backup, and I don't think anyone in that locker room is going to bat too much of an eye at that. Yeah,
and another thing, too, that people have kind of overlooked is the Broncos have 4 wins this season, and all 4 of those wins have been with Trevor Siemian at quarterback, and that's not something that people are really talking about. But this is kind of what you want. This is the ideal game from Trevor Siemian, and obviously he's had better games where he goes out and throws 4 touchdowns like he did against the Cowboys. But I don't think that's really necessary when the defense is firing on all cylinders like it does, and it really helps to play complementary football, and that's what they did yesterday. And another thing to Simeon's credit, too, is they didn't run the ball spectacularly well. I think Bill Musgrave did a good job of balancing the offense, and even when the run game wasn't really picking up huge chunks of yardage, still made sure to give it to C.J. Anderson just to provide that there was an option between running and passing. And that really helped Siemian. That helped with the protection, I thought. He knew when to bail out, and he did a better job of bailing out and feeding his receivers along the sideline and keeping his eyes downfield. Overall, obviously not a spectacular game by any means, but if he plays like that every week, right, and he goes 200 yards and a touchdown and no turnovers, the Broncos are winning far more games than they end up losing. Absolutely.
If he does that each and every week, they go 9-7 this year. But for whatever reason, that's just not the way it shook out. And it's not that you throw Trevor Siemian by the wayside. I still think with 1 year left on his deal with the Broncos, he has a place on this team. But I do think regardless of how the Broncos procure that next quarterback, whether it's free agency or the draft, I think obviously Osweiler's gone, and I don't think there's any reason to keep Lynch around. I think there's still going to be some kind of a market for Lynch on the trade block. I think he's not a guy that you could go out and try and capitalize on getting any kind of high-round draft pick or anything like that, but you can unload him. You can unload that salary, for a conditional late-round pick. The team takes him. If he finds a way to produce X, Y, and Z, the Broncos get a late-round pick. And at least that way the Broncos get something out of that draft pick. Now, another thing I want to talk about that was historic about that win for the Broncos was Von Miller. He recorded his 10th sack of the season against the Jets, which set a Broncos record because it was his 6th career double-digit sack season. Now, what's interesting, he joins Reggie White and DeMarcus Ware as the only players in NFL history, and this is since sacks became official back in 1982, to record double-digit sacks totals in 6 of their first 7 seasons. That's some pretty rarefied air there, Will. And you factor in his ring, you factor in his Super Bowl MVP award, his All-Pros, his Pro Bowls. I think Von Miller's already done enough to make it into Canton. Like, if he just goes out and for however many more years he plays, let's say 4 more years of upper echelon caliber, if he just does 8 to 10 sacks a season, I think this is a guy who's going to end up in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I think if he retired tomorrow, I think he probably makes it into the Hall of Fame on the strength of not only 6 10-sack seasons, but the playoff run in 2015. I think that really, really boosts his resume and sets him apart from guys like J.J. Watt, Justin Houston, Jason Pierre-Paul, some of those guys. So, yep. Khalil Mack, another guy.
Just going to say.
Yeah. But there's another dimension to his game, too, that I think that sets him apart from those other guys. Obviously, we know what he does as a pass rusher. He's, a top 3 pure pass rusher, I think, in the NFL. And to some extent, that list is interchangeable, and it changes from time to time, too. But he's a great run stopper. He's so good at tracking down a play from the backside and just pulling a guy's legs down from out underneath him. I think he's, he uses his speed so well, and really
strength. When the ball's coming his side, play side, Von Miller, he has the strength to not only hold up and set the edge at the point of attack, but he finds a way to throw guys off him and knife in there to make that tackle. He's phenomenal.
Yeah, no, he's an unbelievable athlete just because, like he said, he's super strong, he's incredibly fast, and he's probably the most flexible linebacker I think there is in the league, and you can see that when you see him go against offensive tackles and see how low to the ground he gets on pass rushes. It's I don't know, it's from another planet. I've never seen it before.
It's cool also to see how he sets up tackles. The sack he got on Sunday against the Jets, that spin move, that was a play that was many snaps in the making, the way he finally set up that tackle, spin move. It's interesting, the game within a game, and Von Miller has mastered that, obviously.
Yeah, and another dimension to his game that I don't think people bring up enough is he's actually very good in pass coverage too, because if you want to go back to the 2015 playoffs, and there are more recent examples, but I think this is the most telling of them all, and you go back to that AFC Championship game, he picks Brady in the Broncos, within the Broncos 20-yard line, or the Patriots 20-yard line, I should say, right in their own territory, and that sets up a touchdown pass to Owen Daniels. The Broncos don't win the game without that play by Von Miller, I don't think. The offense is charging the length of the field and then cashing in with a touchdown. And remember, that was only a 1-point game. Yep. And another play a couple weeks later in the Super Bowl, he covers Jericho Cotchery and breaks up a pass in the end zone. And remember, that was a 6-point game before TJ Ward recovered that Von Miller strip sack too. So if those 2 pass breakups, well, one was a breakup and another was actually an interception. The Broncos don't win the Super Bowl without it. I don't think they even get to the Super Bowl without it.
He's got every tool that you need. He's a phenomenal leader. This year, as bad as it's been for the Broncos, Von Miller has still found a way to lead, and it's been impressive with DeMarcus Ware now gone to see him turn that corner. And we still have a few more topics we want to get into before we get out of here. But before we do, we want to say thank you to our sponsor, Audible. Guys, if you haven't done this yet, make sure you capitalize on the opportunity to get a free audiobook download that comes also with a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/huddleup. There's over 180,000 different titles to choose from. iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Doesn't matter what you're using. Again, audibletrial.com/huddleup. I use this literally on a daily basis, which is one of the reasons why we formed this partnership with Audible, because it's a product, it's a service, it's an app that I fully believe in and utilize. And especially those of you who are the hardcore listeners, you like the Audible medium. You like listening to your content. And there's so much cool stuff on Audible, no matter what your tastes and what your interests are. So capitalize on that opportunity to get a free audiobook download and get that 30-day free trial. And it's also, big reminder, it's also a great way to support the show and allow us to continue to bring these episodes to you each and every week. Now, one last thing I want to touch on about this game, Will, before we move on to some other bigger topics or macro topics, is just the overall passion and intensity. This whole Broncos team played with passion against the Jets. It was really the first time in a long time that you could tell the players were having fun out on the grass. And it's not just because they got out to an early lead. I mean, they were loose. They were the more physical team, and I really dug that intensity. It just made me think, I know it was the Jets, but why haven't we seen this caliber of performance since week 2? Why did it take 8 straight losses for the Broncos to figure out their model, to play complementary football? And, that's a question Vance Joseph's going to have to ask himself. It's a question he's going to have to answer to Elway and company. And a lot of it, I'm sure, can be chalked up to his inexperience and it being his first year as a head coach and going through that trial and error learning curve. A lot can probably be attributed to, inheriting a veteran football team that was still very much living in the past and holding on to this past Super Bowl glory and old grudges and all this stuff in the locker room. A lot can also probably be summed up by having one of the worst quarterback situations in football. And John Elway knows he handed Joseph a terrible quarterback room. It's not that the Broncos, it's not that John Elway didn't or hasn't tried to address the quarterback position. It's just that the moves they've made haven't worked out. They've turned out to be fool's gold. What we've learned, or maybe have been reminded of this year, is that no matter how talented your team is, no matter how good your defense is, Will, I mean, we hear about, defense wins championships and all that, but at the NFL, to sustain, it's all about having the quarterback. And until the Broncos have a legitimate franchise caliber QB, this is how it's going to be. It's like you hear about the great defenses of all time. You hear about the 85 Bears, 2000 Ravens, the 02 Bucks, or whether that was 03, 02. Now the Broncos. 2013 Seahawks, 2015 Broncos. I mean, these are teams that won one Super Bowl. These aren't, when you hear about defense wins championships, yes, there's truth to that. But there's also, you don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, because the teams who have won with these elite historical defenses have been flashes in the pan. I mean, the Bears, they were good after 85, but they never went back and won another championship, and then they fizzled. And the same can be said for each and every one of these defenses. So, yes, you need to have the pieces in place to be competitive defensively, but the more important thing to sustain success is quarterback. And until the Broncos have that guy, they're going to continue to be unpredictable. They're going to continue to be inconsistent as a football team who probably loses more games than they win.
Right. I think the ideal for a Super Bowl team, and obviously the teams like the Broncos and the Buccaneers and the Ravens and the teams you mentioned are kind of the exception to the rule. And I think you do need a prerequisite level of defense to win. A few exceptions in there with teams like, I don't know, like the Colts and then the 2010 Packers, who were not necessarily great defenses or anything, but they were really opportunistic, and especially in the playoffs, even more so.
Yep.
But I think what you really want more than anything is it's hard to have a great quarterback that you're paying a ton of money and then also maintain a really high level of talent on defense. So I think the ideal would probably be a great defense, or at least an above average defense, with a quarterback who's making first contract money. And you think about teams like the 2013 Seahawks, and maybe like Joe Flacco on the Ravens before he signed his big contract, which obviously you can see the results of what happened there, and they're
fools.
They don't. Yeah, they really didn't get back. I got back to the playoffs, I think, once since Flacco signed that contract. So
yep.
You can tell what that does to deplete the other areas on your roster, especially defense, I think, because, guys like Paul Kruger and other members of that defense basically led a mass exodus after that season because there wasn't the money to keep them. And that's kind of what happens is a Super Bowl forces you to pay your quarterback. And I think the Broncos were lucky to some extent that Peyton Manning was on his way out, and they didn't have to pay him to keep him around, to reward him for that Super Bowl victory. So,
although if he was still in his prime, they would have been happy to. That's a problem you want to have,
Yeah, but it's a tough one to sustain too if you're spending most of your resources on one player out of 53. Like I said, the ideal situation is you win while you have a guy in their first 4 or 5 years. And that's going to be tough. That's obviously not the case if you go and sign a guy like Kirk Cousins for the Broncos.
Right.
I think.
Which is one of the big reasons why I'm more of a proponent that the Broncos need to go back to the draft, but that's not what this episode's about. Right.
And we'll touch on that later in the season, obviously. But yeah, no, it's kind of it's a little bit of a conundrum because you want to allocate top level resources, or you want to have a top level guy at quarterback without allocating top level resources because it really takes away from the rest of your team. That's kind of one of the catch-22s of professional football right now.
Damned if you do, damned if you don't. Well, hey, running out of time, one last topic I want to touch on here before we get out for the night. The news broke on Monday, of course, the Broncos are putting Ron Leary on injured reserve. He's played at a Pro Bowl level for this team through an 8-game losing streak. Of course, he's missed the last 2 games with the lower back injury. And with nothing to play for, well, it makes sense for the Broncos just to shut him down, protect that multi-million-dollar investment. But it gives a guy like Connor McGovern another extended opportunity. He started these last 2 games, and Pro Football Focus hasn't been too kind to Connor McGovern, but I went back and studied the film on the coach's film on McGovern from Week 13 in Miami, which was his first career start, and I came away very impressed with McGovern. Now, I haven't had a chance to do that yet with the Jets tape, but I will because I'm very curious. McGovern's a guy that intrigues me to no end, especially because I think he had such a strong offseason, he had a strong training camp, and then on the other side you've got a guy like Max Garcia, whom the Broncos have doggedly and almost blindly stuck to for these last 2 seasons, starting him at left guard, and they've gotten pretty much close to nothing in return for it. I mean, if they're really intent on fixing their offensive line, if that's up there on the priority list, maybe 1B to quarterback being 1A, you can't go into 2018 with Max Garcia earmarked as your starting guard, left guard again. You just can't do it. Ron Leary's one, and I'm hoping Connor McGovern can separate himself and prove that he can be that other guy. But who are some of the other young guys, Will, that, the Broncos picked up that elusive win. We've been talking about them needing to get younger guys in the game, and I think one of the things that's held Vance Joseph back from doing that was just this compulsion to break the streak. They finally did it. So who are some of the younger guys? We saw DeMarcus Walker make a play or 2 against the Jets, which was nice to see. But with 3 games left to go, Will, for you, who are some of the young names you want to see more of for the Broncos?
Well, I think first of all, and I don't know if it's possible to do this season, but I'd like to see DeMarcus Walker play at his natural position, which is probably as a 3-4 defensive end. And with Derek Wolfe out for the year, that seems like it might be a little more feasible, but given the way that he trained, I think they pushed him towards being an outside linebacker, and it's hard to.
Well, he dropped so much weight.
Yeah, it's hard to get that strength back and put your hand in the ground for the rest of the season when you've prepared basically to be an outside rusher, which he hasn't really been super effective at.
I think they played him. They rushed him a few times from the inside, at least late in the game. And he had one play where, if I can recall right, I'll have to go back and double-check this, but I'm pretty sure he got himself, if not of actual pressure, like he beat his man inside. So that was good to see. But I agree with you. That's one guy.
So the other guy that comes to mind is definitely the running back from Coastal Carolina, D'Angelo Henderson. And just looking at him in the preseason and seeing what he brought to the table, obviously he fumbled a couple of times, but he had that long run to win the game in Chicago and was generally just very, very productive. Otherwise, I think a good special teams player as well, but he didn't really seem like a guy who needed a redshirt year. And Jamal Charles hasn't been particularly effective, and I know that he's a veteran, and you're going to give him, especially when the playoffs are on the line, you're going to give the veteran the snaps and keep him active while deactivating, a fifth-round rookie. But the season's not on the line anymore. And Jamal Charles hasn't been necessarily – and it's not all his fault, because I don't think they've been necessarily game planning around him or putting him in the best opportunities to succeed. But he hasn't been particularly effective, and he hasn't made a ton of plays, especially in the latter part of the season. So I think with 3 games, there's really no reason to not see what you have in D'Angelo Henderson and give him some meaningful snaps. Let him see and work out those ball security issues while there's really nothing on the line, and give him a chance to take some real live reps and get hit by some NFL players.
It's basically an opportunity to play guys in 3 more preseason games, 3 exhibition games, if you will, but going against first-string caliber talent, right? Because that's the downside to preseason snaps for these young guys, is they look good because they're going against second, third, and fourth-string guys. So that would be one of the added benefits, is seeing how they play against other veterans in this league, first and second team guys who are fighting for their careers, who are fighting for postseason berths and all that. I think really it just comes down to the young guys. I mean, I want to see more of Cody Latimer. Now, I mean, he's in a contract year. I think the Broncos need to find a way to give him some more looks in these remaining games, because I think he's a guy they need to try and find a way on a team-friendly basis to bring him back. Jordan Taylor, Marcus Rios, he's an undrafted rookie. They sat Brendan Langley, their third-round pick, this past week. He did not dress. He was a healthy scratch. They promoted Marcus Rios off the practice squad, undrafted out of UCLA, cornerback, and he dressed. Let's see more of him. Let's see more of Langley. Any of the rookie class who haven't had a lot of opportunity yet, including Jamal Carter, put him on the field. And we'll probably see a lot more of Jamal Carter, actually, because Justin Simmons sprained his ankle, and technically he's day-to-day, but so there might be more opportunity there. But I'm not just talking rookies. Like, let's see more Jordan Taylor. Let's see more Connor McGovern. Any of the guys that are on the 53 that the Broncos need to know more about, especially anybody that's going into any kind of restricted or exclusive rights free agent thing going into next year, or even unrestricted, like in the case of Cody Latimer. Let's get him on the field and see what's what.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up Jordan Taylor, and if we were going to give out game balls this week, I think he'd probably get my first one, just for actually executing the football act of catching a punt and then running forward in a semi-straight line without losing control of said football. But he was I think, a revelation at punt returner, and kind of proved that you can have a guy that's going to catch the ball and maybe not be the fastest dude in the world, but he's going to take good angles, and he's going to get you a pretty solid average and put you in a good position to succeed on offense. So I think he's a guy that you want to keep back there at punt returner for the rest of the season, and then kind of work from there. But I was really kind of disappointed this year in Jordan Taylor as a receiver, mostly because they didn't really play him a lot. Like, he was inactive for a good majority of the season. And I think definitely based on the way he finished 2016, going back to games like that Saints game and then that Chiefs game, where he really established a good rapport, I thought, with Trevor Siemian. I thought that was going to be a bigger factor this year, and I think Benny Fowler early in the season kind of took his role, especially in that Chargers game where he caught 2 touchdowns, and then in that Dallas game he was getting a lot of targets. I'm happy to see that Cody Latimer is really making plays as a receiver. I was really impressed with that 27-yard back shoulder throw by Trevor Siemian that Cody Latimer came down with. Yeah, that was a really important play that led to the field goal. And you know how tough it's been for the Broncos to even get a lead early in games. So that's a really big play and a really big confidence booster for a quarterback and really the offense as a whole. And we know what he does on special teams, and I think that's worth the price of admission alone for a guy like Cody Latimer. There's guys like Kassim Osgood who are perennial Pro Bowlers in their career based on exclusively what they do in special teams, and I think he's kind of turned into one of those guys for the Broncos. And not only though is he a special teams demon, he'll catch a touchdown. I don't think he's ever going to be the guy that the Broncos envisioned when they picked him in the second round out of Indiana a few years ago. But if you can get a lot of really high level production on special teams, and then some contributions as a receiver. I'm not talking about like a 1 or 2 guy where he's, inching towards 1,000 yards every year. But, if he's adding 30 or so catches and 400 yards and a handful of touchdowns every year, I think that's a win to get a guy like Cody Latimer back on what would probably be a team-friendly deal.
I hope they do. I hope they find a way to get Cody back. It's got to make sense for the team, and I don't think he's going to find a team out there willing to break the bank to bring him in. But, yeah, let's just hope we continue to see more from the young guys. I think we saw some trends pointing in that direction, and I wouldn't exclude Isaiah McKenzie, not as a punt returner, but let's see it. Let's get him out there in the offense. So we'll see how it shakes out. But that's all the time, boys and girls, we have for today. You can find Will in the Twitterverse at WillKeys6. Myself at Chad and Jensen. Tweet us your questions. We'll try to address your concerns on the show as often as we can. This is a short week with Indy on Thursday, so look for Nick and Carl's preview of the Colts game, hopefully late Tuesday night. And then, of course, the fellas over there are still working on the draft stuff, so stay tuned for that. And make sure you're subscribing, y'all. For Will, I'm Chad. We'll talk to you soon.
Mile High Huddle.